This is the image Iran does not want you to understand. A steel hull, 95 feet long. 7 men, sitting silent on the floor of the Persian Gulf in 80 feet of warm, cluttered, pipeline-choked water. Batteries running. Engine off. Conning tower submerged. It has been there since 3 in the morning. 14 nautical miles away. A United States Navy destroyer is on patrol. Sonar working. Radar working. The most advanced surface combatant on Earth. It cannot find the submarine. Not because the submarine is sophisticated. Not because Iran has cracked some classified American technology. Because the submarine is 95 feet long, costs $30 million, runs on batteries, and is sitting in water so shallow, so warm, so acoustically chaotic that the sonar systems built to hunt Russian ballistic missile submarines in the deep North Atlantic are effectively blind. Iran has deployed 16 of these boats this month. 16. Each one carrying 2 torpedoes or 2 anti-ship missiles. Each one costing less than a single F-35. 16 invisible sentinels, according to Tehran's own announcement, positioned as what their Navy commander publicly called invisible guardians of the Strait. If you do not understand why that statement matters, why the speed of that deployment, and the silence of the American response to it tells you something important about where this conflict is going, you do not yet understand what Iran has actually built here. Stay with me, because this one connects directly to what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now. What Iran actually deployed here is what you need to understand first. The Ghadir-class submarine entered Iranian service in 2007. It is 29 meters long, roughly the length of a school bus. It displaces 125 tons submerged. It carries a crew of 7. Compare that to the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer it is designed to threaten. 505 feet long. Crew of 300. Displacement over 9,000 tons. The destroyer is 70 times heavier than the submarine it cannot find. From its 2 torpedo tubes, the Ghadir can fire the Valfajr, a heavyweight torpedo designed to break a ship's keel from below. It can fire the Hoot, a supercavitating torpedo traveling inside a gas bubble at speeds approaching 200 miles per hour based on a Soviet design from the 1970s. It can fire the JAS-2, a submarine-launched cruise missile that exits the torpedo tube underwater, breaks the surface, ignites, and hunts a surface ship at sea level. Range 35 kilometers. Warhead 130 kilograms. The same missile that Iran's drone boats fire from the surface. The Ghadir fires it from below. The Ghadir can also lay naval mines. It carries frogmen, Iranian special operations divers, 4 to 6 per mission, who exit through a lockout chamber while the boat sits stationary on the seabed. 7 sailors, 2 torpedoes, 2 missiles, a mine layer, a frogman transport, all inside a hull the size of a school bus. There are more than 20 operational today, and Iran just told the world that 16 of them are actively on station in the Strait of Hormuz. The question nobody is asking here is what nobody is reporting about that announcement. The Iranian regular Navy has been decimated. We have covered that in detail. 120 warships lost in 39 days, frigates sunk, corvettes gone, patrol craft burning at their moorings. But the regular Iranian Navy was never the threat in the Strait. The threat in the Strait has always been 3 things operating simultaneously: mines, fast boats, and submarines. 3 threats that exploit 3 separate and distinct American vulnerabilities. Iran calls them its layered sea denial strategy. American planners, when they speak candidly, call it the 3-threat stack. The mines are in the water. We documented that 3 weeks ago. The drone boats are running coastal patrols. We've documented that in our last video. And now the submarines are on station. The stack is complete. Here is why that matters right now. A viewer named Ken left a comment under our Mines video that captures exactly the right question. He wrote, "If its military infrastructure is shattered, how come they are still able to shoot down U.S. aircraft and launch missiles?" That is the correct question. And the Ghadir class is a large part of the answer. Iran's conventional navy was the surface layer, the part that could be seen, targeted, and destroyed in a fleet engagement. What remains, what has always been the core of Iran's strait denial capability, is invisible, underwater, running on batteries, sitting on the seabed in 50 meters of warm, acoustically impossible water. And the United States Navy, which spent 5 decades and hundreds of billions of dollars preparing to hunt Soviet submarines in the deep, cold, clear North Atlantic, cannot reliably find them. Why the playbook was written for the wrong ocean. To understand why this moment is so dangerous and why the American anti-submarine response has been so limited, we have to understand something that the Pentagon has not wanted to say publicly for 20 years. The Persian Gulf is, in almost every measurable way, the worst possible environment for American anti-submarine warfare doctrine. Average depth, 50 meters. That is roughly the height of a 16-story building. The Strait of Hormuz at its narrowest 21 miles across. The shipping channels within it, narrower still. The water is warm. Warm water scrambles acoustic propagation. The bottom is layered with pipelines, oil wellheads, and wreck debris going back to the 1980s. The surface above is choked with merchant traffic even now under blockade. Now compare that to where the United States Navy spent 50 years preparing to fight the North Atlantic, the Norwegian Sea, the deep canyons west of the Aleutian Islands, waters 3 to 5 kilometers deep, cold water, clear acoustic conditions, almost no surface traffic. The American sonar fleet, the towed arrays, the underwater listening grids, the maritime patrol aircraft, the nuclear hunter-killer submarines, all of it was built around a single operational concept. Find Soviet ballistic missile submarines in deep, cold, quiet ocean and kill them before they could launch. That world ended in 1991. The threat moved. Nobody updated the playbook. What shallow water does to a sonar system here is the operational reality that the Navy's public statements have carefully avoided. Sonar is essentially a sound-based flashlight. You emit a pulse. It bounces off something. The echo returns. From the echo, you estimate size, shape, distance, speed. In deep, cold, clear water, the only things returning echoes are submarines, whales, and the occasional container that fell off a freighter. The picture is clean. The system works. In shallow water, the pulse bounces off the seabed, then off the surface, then off a pipeline, then off a fishing boat's hull, then off the school of fish beneath that fishing boat, then off another section of seabed. By the time the echo reaches the destroyer, it is not an echo. It is acoustic noise. The flashlight is on. The room is full of mirrors. Somewhere inside that noise is a 95-foot submarine running on batteries. The sonar operator cannot isolate it. Sometimes the operator cannot confirm it is there at all. This is not theoretical. The Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey has been publishing papers on the shallow water anti-submarine problem since the 1990s. Brian Clark, a former Navy submarine officer now at the Hudson Institute, has argued for years that the United States lost its institutional capacity for shallow water submarine hunting when it retired its diesel-electric fleet in the early 1990s. Jerry Hendricks of the Sagamore Institute has been making the same case in different words for almost as long. And here is the part that nobody in official Washington wants to discuss directly. The exercise that changed everything nobody would talk about in 2005. The United States Navy ran a series of exercises off the California coast against a Swedish diesel-electric submarine called the Gotland. Real boat, real crew, real torpedoes unloaded for the exercise. The Gotland ran circles around the USS Ronald Reagan carrier strike group for the better part of 2 years. It penetrated the destroyer screen. It achieved firing position against the carrier repeatedly. The Reagan was simulated, sunk multiple times. The official Navy response was that there were lessons learned. There is an older precedent, 1981. NATO exercises in the North Atlantic. A Canadian Oberon-class diesel-electric submarine, a 60-year-old design with a crew of about 70, slipped through the escort screen of the USS Eisenhower and put simulated torpedoes into the carrier without ever being detected. The Eisenhower, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered supercarrier, 5,500 sailors, 90 aircraft. The boat that sank it was found by no one. Here is what those two exercises have in common with the Strait of Hormuz in 2026. The submarine that wins is not the sophisticated one. It is the quiet one. The diesel-electric submarine running on batteries is, in documented recorded cases, quieter than American nuclear submarines, quieter than ambient ocean noise, quieter than the merchant ship 2 miles away. The Ghadir is a diesel-electric submarine. Iran has 16 of them on station right now. The math that should be in every defense briefing here is the arithmetic that the Pentagon understands and does not like to say aloud. A Ghadir-class submarine costs an estimated $30 million to build. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer costs $2.20 billion. That is a ratio of 73 to 1. Iran can build 73 Ghadirs for the price of one American destroyer. The C-704 anti-ship missile the Ghadir fires from its torpedo tube costs $30,000 to $50,000 per round. The American Standard Missile Interceptor designed to stop it costs $2 to $4 million per round. That is a ratio approaching 100 to 1 in favor of the attacking weapon. Iran can fire 100 anti-ship missiles for the price of one American interceptor, and the interceptor is not guaranteed to work. This is not a fleet engagement. It was never designed to be a fleet engagement. Iran is not attempting to defeat the United States Navy in open water. Iran is attempting to make the cost of operating in the Strait of Hormuz economically and operationally unbearable. The math says Iran is winning that argument, not on the battlefield, in the spreadsheet. The decision that hollowed out the capability here is the part that is directly relevant to what is unfolding right now, and it is the part that official briefings have consistently omitted. The United States Navy used to know how to fight in shallow water. It had its own diesel-electric submarine fleet. It had dedicated mine warfare doctrine. It had ships designed specifically for choke point operations. It had institutional memory, chiefs and officers who had trained for exactly this environment. In the early 1990s, after the Cold War ended and the budgets contracted, the Navy made a decision. The diesel boats were retired. The minesweepers were drawn down. The shallow water training infrastructure was dismantled. The institutional memory walked out the door, one retiring chief petty officer at a time. The assumption behind that decision was explicit. The United States would only ever fight enemies with deep-water navies. The Soviet Union, perhaps China someday. There was no operational plan for a country with no real conventional navy, fighting from inside a 21-mile strait with 7-man submarines and shore-launched missiles built from Chinese parts. That assumption has now produced its consequence. In 1988, when Admiral Anthony Less commanded the fleet engagement we now call Operation Praying Mantis, the largest American naval surface battle since the Second World War, he fought with a force that had been trained for this specific environment. His men had practiced shallow water operations. They had Avenger-class minesweepers. They had SH-60 Romeo helicopters with dipping sonar. They had diesel-electric submarine veterans on the staff. The Navy of 2026 does not have that muscle. That is not nostalgia. That is the operational record. Why this reaches every American household, you may be asking why this matters beyond the strait. Here is the answer. Approximately 20% of the world's seaborne oil supply transits through the Strait of Hormuz. When ship insurance premiums for Persian Gulf transit doubled in March, and they did, that cost did not stay in Hartford. It moved to the refineries. The refineries moved it to the distributors. The distributors moved it to the gas stations. The gas stations moved it to the family in the school parking lot at 3 in the afternoon. The same transmission applies to home heating oil on the American East Coast, which will be relevant again next winter unless something structurally changes. It applies to industrial diesel, which runs the trucks that supply the grocery stores. When the Navy cannot locate and neutralize a school bus-sized submarine in 50 meters of water, the price of everything on the eastern seaboard adjusts by an amount that no budget document will state directly on its cover page. The larger implication that Beijing is watching there is one more layer. And this is the layer that should be keeping the operational planners in Washington awake. China is watching. The Taiwan Strait is also a choke point. The Taiwan Strait is also shallow water. The People's Liberation Army Navy has been studying that strait for 30 years. China has been systematically building its own fleet of small diesel-electric submarines, the Yuan class, the Song class, variants that cannot be publicly confirmed. China is building the shore-launched anti-ship missiles, the submarine-launched variants, the land-based ballistic systems targeting surface groups. The math of the Strait of Hormuz is the exact same math that applies to the South China Sea and the Strait of Taiwan. If the United States Navy cannot solve the shallow water submarine problem and Hormuz in a 21-mile strait against a regional power with a $30 million boat, it cannot solve it in the Pacific against a peer competitor. Beijing knows this. Iran is the rough draft. China is the final paper. The next decade of American strategic credibility may be substantially determined by whether someone in Washington produces a real answer to the question this situation is forcing. Where the road leads here is the equation as it stands today. After 76 days of this conflict, Iran has constructed a sea denial architecture that costs roughly 2% of what the American counter-strategy costs. The mines are laid, the drone boats are on patrol, and as of the 11th of this month, by Tehran's own public announcement, 16 Ghadir-class submarines are on station as invisible guardians of the strait. 1 week ago, the CIA told the president in an assessment leaked to the Washington Post that Iran can outlast the American blockade for months, not weeks, months. The three-threat stack is complete, and the capability gap that makes that stack viable, the shallow water problem, the retired diesel fleet, the abandoned doctrine, was not created by Iran. It was created by decisions made in Washington in the 1990s under assumptions that no longer hold. In 1988, the American response to Iranian naval provocation was immediate and overwhelming because the Navy had been prepared to fight in that environment. Operation Praying Mantis destroyed half of Iran's combat fleet in 8 hours. because the men executing it had the training, the doctrine, and the institutional knowledge the mission required. The Navy of 2026 is executing that same mission with a different toolset, one optimized for the deep Atlantic, not the shallow Gulf, against the threat that has had 30 years to study exactly where those tools fail. The Ghadir class is not a sophisticated weapon. It is a precisely calibrated exploitation of a specific, documented, long-acknowledged American blind spot, and Iran just told the world it has 16 of them in the water. Watch what comes next with the understanding that the destination of this problem is already written in 2 decades of naval postgraduate school papers, unclassified defense think tank reports, and the operational record of every exercise in which a diesel-electric submarine made a carrier strike group disappear. The question is not whether the United States Navy understands the problem. The question is whether it can solve it in time. Subscribe now. In the next 48 to 72 hours, Iranian naval activity in the Strait will tell you whether Tehran believes it has found the answer to American pressure or whether it believes the answer was never necessary. We will be here mapping the doctrine behind the headlines, because what happens in that 21-mile stretch of water does not stay there.